wanted to see a world where no man dies of prostate cancer. Passion to help those that were disadvantaged by not having private health insurance. When you're in a for-purpose organisation, I think it trumps the ROI every time. People sort of don't really want to hear about the ROI. It's a good idea. It's going to save lives. We should be doing it. I think it's trying to find people that are related to the cause. That makes it a huge thing. If you get the right person, obviously you've got to support them, give them the right tools and resources where you can, and then, for God's sake, get out of their way.
If you want to get rid of talented people, just tell them what to do all the time. They'll go away anyway. They'll leave you.
Correct. I'd say to somebody is don't die wondering. Don't be discouraged by the doom and gloom that's going on. If you start that journey, you'd be surprised sometimes where it'll take you, and sometimes it won't work, but that's okay. You learn along the way as well. I think be bold.
Welcome to the People Quotient podcast, where we focus on three key areas: building companies, mastering leadership, and prioritizing your people. Hey, Mark. Welcome to the People Quotient podcast.
Thanks, bro. It's nice to be part of it.
Yeah, I'd love to have you here. Yeah, I'm very excited. But when I was sort of preparing for this, you're not even on LinkedIn. So who is Mark Harrison? A secret.
I'm not that interesting. Although I was an early adopter of LinkedIn, but I've fallen off the wagon a little bit of recent times.
Yeah, and that's why I would have you give your sort of background. But at the highest level, you're a CEO of APC, Australian Prostrate Center, and you have been at the helm for quite some time. So that's all I know. So I'll hand it over to you. So you can.
It's pretty short and sweet. I can give you the rest of it. So yeah, been the CEO for going on probably about 9 years now. And prior to that, lived a life in private equity, commercial finance, in health sectors, and also in commercial retail finance. And in the very early days in some medical research. So a little bit schizophrenic history, but no great real rhyme or reason to where I've landed. I think some people are very pointed where they want to go. I've been probably passing ships and, moving doors. You go past somewhere at an opportune time and it sounds like a good opportunity. So that's how this one started. I sort of, they were looking for somebody for 3 months in the role, and now it's about 9 years that I've been here. So, it's been an interesting journey.
3 very long months. I get it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I'm still trying to raise money for us.
Yeah. So one of the things that non-profit sector is one of the trickiest sectors, because you've obviously you're a mission-driven organization. So maybe share a little bit about the mission of the organization. And then on top of it, how do you layer in the vision that you and the board have and where you want to take it? So a bit of background on that would be awesome.
Yeah. So the vision was really created by a couple of really special people in terms of the founders of the charity. They were already in prostate cancer, particularly in the medical side of it. He felt impassioned to help those that were disadvantaged by not having private health insurance. Those people pretty much across Australia will probably wait 6 to 12 months to see a doctor if they don't have their private health insurance on the public system. And so they wanted to address that. And really that's the sort of driving force behind it. And then from that point of view, the vision sort of created that we wanted to see a world where no man dies of prostate cancer, which we're not at that point yet. But until we get to that point, how can we help men and their families live a longer, better quality life? And I think as part of a community in that space, I think we've helped contribute to that.
That's amazing. You mentioned a little bit about two things. One is your background in finance and private equity. And then you obviously also touched on the notion of capital raise very quickly. And so is that the biggest piece of your background coming in that you find yourself diving into? Because you're not medical yourself, not. So how does that help you or give you an advantage or a disadvantage? I'd love to hear that.
I think everybody brings something to the role with their background. For me, I have a blind side on the deep medical piece. I have an understanding from it, but certainly I'm kind of blessed in the organisation. We have some great, if not local, international expertise. So from that perspective, the organisation is very well structured. And yeah, I think for me it was really to put controls, governance and regulations to make sure we continue to do our work in the right fashion as a key role. And then, the other probably 60% is how do you raise funds so that we can grow and be sustainable in the long run.
Yeah.
So that's always a driving piece. I don't know, probably 2/3 of every day is probably, chasing our fundraising portfolio, trying to increase that as we go. And that's probably because we've been somewhat, I would describe us as a early stage startup without capital funding because we're in the not-for-profit space. So we've always been sort of chasing our tail. It's not like we started the business, went to private equity and got a large sum of money and said, we'll go and deliver X, Y, Z, leave us alone for a couple of years. We've always been, you have to find money to do the next bit of work that we want to do. So, yeah, it creates an interesting dynamic.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I think those listening, whether they're investors that are not from the same industry or whether they're CEOs who have come into an industry that they're not familiar with, that's one area that I'd love to dive into, because I think you've got obviously a wealth of knowledge there. And then second place where I'd love to dive in is this notion of capital raise, right? Which is, again, whether you're a CEO who's early stage, as you said, and you're thinking like a startup, but it's early stage. And so some CEOs in that stage would relate to it. And then there are also CEOs looking for follow-on rounds in this market, right? Because this is a very unique market in which capital raise is an interesting beast. How did you add value, and where were the places where you felt like, man, I wish I had known that, it would have been better served?
I've probably had quite a few of those. The starting point for me, and you hear everybody say it, obviously, is being a good listener. So I guess when I first got in here, it was pretty obvious to me we didn't have a lack of expertise in our core subject matter, from researchers to the medical people. They were all experts in their own right, so I don't think there was anything that I could add, obviously, to that. It was more understanding what improves their environment in terms of tools, resources, culture, how can we advance that work. So I really took that as a sort of the collaborative part of the role that I had to try to drive through the business, because in terms of medical stewardship and governance, that just wasn't an issue. So I think in the early days, I spent a lot of time on that, and a lot of that was also, many people are subject matter experts, but they don't like to go out of their wheelhouse. So, if it was in the business stuff, researchers and clinicians, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are like, I don't want to deal with that. You deal with it. So that was probably the early days. So yeah, a lot of listening. I think a lot of sort of test and learn as well. So rather than, come back after that and say, well, it should be A, B, C, it's like, okay, we've got a couple of options. Let's all talk them through to make sure everyone bought into it. And then making sure we were paired up with good people on the board and in the senior leadership. So I don't think there's anything too unique about it. But it was an interesting journey. And I think having respect for the experts you have in your business is really important. It's not for me to get up and sing from the hymn of the latest prostate cancer treatment because I don't understand it. And I'd be seen as a fake pretty quick. But we've got people that can do that. And where it's appropriate to talk about the business, and that's part of my role.
Got it. How it brings up an interesting point, because medical is obviously a very highly specialized place, right? And so, but then when I think about other industries, right? So for example, if someone's coming in from a B2B service business into a manufacturing business, or from a CPG into an industrials business, right? I'm sort of taking some hypothetical examples. How much of what you did in terms of relying on the experts to tell you what the answer is versus, okay, I listened to it. How did you pressure test if that was the right option? Because there is a limit to where the technical side stops and the business side starts. Did you have that challenge where, people were telling you this is the right answer, Mark, because we've been in the industry all our life, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to make some choices, especially around capital deployment and OPEX. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of people will find it different, but I think the same formula applies if, I was going into a manufacturing business I knew nothing of. But your point on pressure testing, I think, is important. I mean, I think my assessment where I was we had, as I mentioned, really good expertise. It wasn't in question. Some businesses I have been into, you do go though, and then everyone says they're an expert, and you do need to pressure test that, and you do a bit of, benchmarking, talking to other people in the industry, getting a feel for it, just to validate that. So I think that's important. And then the bit you touched on, when you do come back with the answer to pressure test it, I think it's like everything, and particularly because being a charity, which is no different in some respects to being in a commercial operation, you do get to a point you go, well, we've got to trade something off, and that does put people under pressure. So there's certain things you've got to cut, and that becomes a risk reward. And I think you want to bring everyone along for that journey as best you can, have good debate, good conversations around it, but at some point, not everyone's going to like them, but as long as you explain what it is and continue to bring them along for the journey, I think that's the best as you can do.
That's a really good point, though, because prioritizing where with limited resources, I think anyone listening to this will relate to that. Most of us are trying to prioritize every day, and most of us don't have abundant resources. So I think you were dealing with sort of more of the leading edge, where in a nonprofit charity organization, well, there is funding. It's you've got to be hyper focused. So what tools or what approach do you use to help those around you who may all have their individual areas of interest, reasons for why that should be pursued? Like, how do you sift through that and then pick the top one, two, or three every time there's a bit of a discussion and debate and passions flare up? I have to believe that, but you can correct me if that's not true.
No, that is true, and we're no different. We've had those passionate, good, vigorous debates in a positive environment many times too, which we encourage. I don't think there's any really magic to it. I think, you like to think most of the time if you've done the right research, consulted well, present things in an appropriate manner, we all land on the right point we want to land on or thereabouts. But you're right, there is times where you go, the reality is, and for us being a sort of nascent, early stage, not-for-profit, some of those decisions won't, if people really wanted to push back on it, it wasn't a debate because you said, well, we may not be here. So if we don't do this big project X and make it successful, then you've got another material conversation, which is more about the survivability and sustainability of the organisation. So luckily, touch wood, we haven't had too many of those. Having said that, I'm sure people might say there's some things, like all of us, you look back and think we could have done A, B. One of the things I think we're lucky at is also the board plays a big role for us. Yeah. So they're, very well represented across all sectors, all areas of management and experience. So that's been a really good touch point for us as well, and guidance. So I've relied a lot on them, and certainly some of the senior people in the organisation have as well. So they're another good touch point to help through those times where it might get a bit tricky about, well, are we going left or are we going right? Using them has been helpful.
How much of the core values and the mission comes into play as part of the assessment criteria versus, back to your finance days, ROI, IRRs, return on capital? Where does the debate sort of sit, and what's the go-to place where the board and yourself and the other members of the management team go to when two things look equally important and valuable, and you're like, well, we got to pick one? Is there a place you gravitate to?
I think when you're in a for-purpose organisation, I think it trumps the ROI every time in the debate, because not too many people in the organisation, because you're generally quite small outside your primary mission. So people sort of don't really want to hear about the ROI. It's a good idea. It's going to save lives. We should be doing it. And that sort of dominates the debate. But at some point, you do have to bring that in. And I think that's, I think over time, when you start setting a culture, people go, well, okay, we might have ticked all those other boxes for it, but hey, he's going to have to pass an ROI or a good lens test from our finance team. And then the last bit of that, as it escalates up to the board, is exactly that. I think they take a view, and I think in the charity space, within reason, they're a little bit more back themselves in on their heart, complemented by comfort with the ROI return. But I think they're willing to take a marginal bit more risk on trying something without, betting the farm on it, because I think that's what really drives charities. You've got to have that drive and purpose, but you can't take all the controls out. So long-winded way of saying it, I think most people will have the debate about it, is it right or wrong for the right reasons to your purpose? And then there's probably 25% where you have to pull it back and say, well, let's look at the raw economics of this thing and whether it works.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think it's almost, in some ways, I'm going back to my entire life of being in private equity and on the for-profit world, where it often starts with, is it tied to strategy, which of course you've got the same thing, but then it sort of flips in that, what's the return on investment for these initiatives? And then you say, okay, based on that, now you've gotten 2 or 3, what's the long term versus short term? Whereas what you're saying is you start with strategy, but really it's driven by purpose. And then only things that serve the purpose will then be taken forward. And if there is a tie, then obviously as a tiebreaker, you may choose to use ROI as a metric, for example, or another financial metric, payback, whatever it is, to say, hey, is it worth it? The second thing you said, which is also really interesting, is that risk appetite is a little bit higher because it's serving a purpose. And by definition, especially in the medical space, because there are a lot of unknowns, you've got to take that risk to be able to solve a problem that probably hasn't been solved before, or not in the same way, for the betterment of the patient population. So there is that inherent risk appetite, whereas in a financially driven model, you're obviously underwriting in a way to reduce the risk in all cases. Yeah. So it's quite different in the way you would underwrite an investment in your world versus a pure...
Very much so. And I think as you scale up into much larger not-for-profits, it gets more traditional to the way you were talking about too, where, you're probably going to take a little less risk and still dominate it by the whatever metrics you're using. So again, for us kind of being in an early stage, I wouldn't say fearless is the word, but there was an appetite to, and you touched on it, like if you want to change the status quo, you're going to have to do something a bit different. So the board, I think, have to be behind that, and we've been very lucky in that space. I've had a board while I've been here that have been in that space.
How does that play through with the investors? Because I think sort of shifting gears to the investor side, because again, in the for-profit world, investors are looking on return of capital, right?
Yep.
Whereas in your world, how does that play through? And then how does that change? So part is, how do you talk to your investors about where you're making the investments or investment choices? Given your point about risk-adjusted returns or more purpose-driven investments. And then second part of it is, given that, how does your capital raise strategy change as to who do you go to, what conversations you have?
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. I kind of think of the portfolio, if you call it investment strategy of our fundraising portfolio, how we go to market in retail fundraising is very much about trying to prove your authenticity, your legitimacy, your point on message, being very clear so that people have trust and they know where the money's going. Then we do a lot of work in sort of trust and foundations, which is more high net worth individuals that have their own private ancillary funds, for example. And that's quite varied. I think, it's easy in the early days, you fall into the trap of thinking, well, one size fits all. It doesn't. So for us, you can have conversations with some trust and foundations. And I've had these conversations where, you might say, look, we need $1 million or $2 million to do project X, and here's what it's going to do, and here's what it will return. And for them, that's alignment to their wishes of where they're wanting to put their donations effectively through. But they put a lens, because they've been successful in business generally in making their money. They put that lens on top of it. So they'll ask some of the questions you mentioned. And then, interestingly, there's some that also take a different lens and say, I'm not going to give you $1 million to go and do the latest research project. You actually need to build capacity in your organisation, and you need working capital. And a lot of charities can't find working capital, and we're one of them, because you're always scratching around, you don't have a big investment to build a corpus. So those donors, some donors, we've had a few that are like, I don't want to invest in a project. I want to invest in working capital into your business. Show me where you're going to put it, and show me how you're going to leverage it, and how it's going to give you a return that you can now go and find flex out in the market because you've built capacity and capability in the organisation. So, quite varied and different ways. And then, I think it's no different to if you were in private equity, people that donate with you or invest in projects, they want to know that they're getting a return. But certainly the big one for us in the higher end would be also showing that we're leveraging that investment from that investor, which is no different to a lot of commercial transactions. They want to know that if I give you $1, you can go and find another $3 because I put my dollar in to get it going.
Got it. And how is the reporting to those investors? Is that, again, given your point about there are different types of investors that are looking for different types of returns, and by the sounds of it, you've got lots of investors.
We've probably had a few. I think we've approached a lot, probably like most in the charity space. But I think if you were talking about the reporting back to them, again, I think you got to personalise that to a degree, which is a bit of a trap, which I'll come to. But some donors are very, rigorous. Send me the monthly report, X, Y, Z. Some are, I only want to see you once or twice. That's fine. Some is, you're going to give me the report, but you're going to come and, see me, or we're going to come to you, and we want to see visible evidence of where the money's gone. So I think getting that right, but the trap sometimes in that case can also be you forget the basics. So basic hygiene factors for an investor is, solid reporting, transparency, being upfront. And I think in the not-for-profit space too, I think you build a relationship with some of them. You ride the bumps. Some people are transactional. They're a one-off donor. Some people are like, I want to invest in what you're doing for 2, 3, 4 years. So, it's not out of the realm too, because we don't have bench strength in terms of expertise in the back office in those enabling functions. quite often we'll go to a donor that's got great experience, and you can share your business problem and you get a bit of that feedback. So it's almost like you're getting a bit of free paid consultancy. Definitely very important, the reporting, but I think trying to, particularly in the high net worth space, making sure that that's tailored appropriately to the individual or individuals.
How is your, as you've scaled and grown over the years, how has your strategy for capital raise shifted, if at all, in terms of who you go and are looking to bring in? Because, the check size might be different, or the type of investor, as well as where you go, the type of person that you're looking for, or company or institution?
I think since I've been here, I don't think our core go-to-market has probably changed. There's a core group that, present in the market that you're always trying to go to. I think what has happened over the time, though, is depending on the cycle in the economy, there's certain groups, individuals, corporates that are, if you want, coming into market. So you tend to spend a bit of time with them and try to read the lens through that. Yep. But given our small nature, we're not anywhere near as advanced, I think, as some other people are in that space. And I think, for the bigger not-for-profits, a whole data warehouse, data analytics, overlaying that now with some AI on top of that is hugely valuable. We tend to be more a relationship and also know what's sort of in our market, because every charity, you might see somebody and they come in and they go, you're amazing, I love what you do, but hey, I love kids' cancer, I'm not into prostate cancer. Fine. So trying to find those people, I think we could spend a bit more time rather than, burning your wheel, sometimes trying to understand that early stage.
Yeah. How much does marketing play into all of this in terms of investing in proactive marketing versus reactive? Reactive meaning that obviously there are conferences and there are other gatherings that happen versus
you also left one out, zero marketing, when you have $0 to market. I think it's massive. It's been one of our biggest challenges. We've never had working capital to proactive market, so we tend to be more on the reactive side, or you tend to try to find a whole lot of pro bono people that will help, tell your story. But I guess in our space, given it's quite a topical area, you can generate a lot of press because there's breakthroughs or new research clinical trials that you're doing. There's an appetite for that. That's a good way to get your brand out. And certainly ambassadors in our case are very useful as well. And patients with lived experience that want to tell their story is very powerful. So we are way underdone in marketing, and it's one of those areas, I think, again, going back to working capital, if we had more money, and, I think you end up in the cycle, more people are aware of you, more people inquire, you can start to find more capital. It is the kind of classic wheel. But, we've been very underdone in that space.
Yeah. And in terms of the capital, last question around capital raises, given where how the market's shifted, and I'm talking about more on the capital markets have shifted. How has that market shifted for you?
Yeah, definitely tighter, I think, and tougher, because I think people are being more hyper-focused, and, it's a little bit harder to even get inquiry sort of early stage conversations. So I think that's been a bit tighter. But then for us, because we tend to play a lot out of high net worth trusts and foundations with their big private ancillary funds, some of those through COVID got much bigger. And then some obviously got impacted. So that's been a bit of the reverse. People are more open to a conversation about what you might want to present because their fund is now grown considerably and they're looking to put more back into society. So a bit of a mixed bag. But, the other one I think for us is adjacencies. So, where is their private investment going, and do we play a role in that market that they're trying to develop? So trying to understand that, because sometimes there's funds for charities in that area that you can access as well. So trying to understand where healthcare delivery or research is developing in terms of new technologies is important as well.
Shifting gears to working capital, but specifically on the human capital side of it. So how difficult does it become for you, again, going back to some of your investors who are saying, look, we want to increase capacity and capability, and humans obviously are a big part of that. Has that become on two sides? One is on the supply side of talent, and then the other side of it is being able to attract them given capital constraints. Talk to us a little bit about how that has shifted in the last few years, and where is that headed in your, So
I think kind of most people would probably agree as a general, coming into COVID, economy was good. Lots of charities were being created, so there seemed to be a reasonable staffing pool to find in that. And I think, there wasn't great wage pressure within reason. But COVID comes, labour pool gets tighter, people's expectations change. So for us, that becomes really, the last 2 years have been really tough to find people, and not being of large scale, it's very difficult to probably get individuals that you're competing against that are going to a bigger charity. Having said that, so what's our focus? I think it's trying to find people that are related to the cause. That makes it a huge thing. They have passion. And I think it's also, again, it's fit for purpose, but we've created an environment where we encourage people to be trying things and being engaged. So I think for some people, they look at that and think, well, I'm not going to be overly structured, stuck at the desk. My ideas aren't going to be heard or thought about. Mm. So I think that gives us another angle to attract talent. But yeah, it's tough. And then, some people you find will come in and will be great, but some people say, well, where is my marketing budget? And you go, well, we haven't really got one this month. We might have a little bit next month. So some people like that and they thrive, and some people say, no, that's not for me, and that's fine too.
Yeah, got it. When you think about in everything that you have to tackle in a given day, week, month, year, what are places where you and your team tend to get most energized? Like we're so excited to do this. How often do you find yourself saying that? And are there any themes that you often seem to talk more about that, with that spirit?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a pretty simple one. It's when you see a patient and their family, commend the team, the service, the place they come to, the care they get. I think that's definitely the most energizing, I think, for the staff. I think if, as you tinker with service delivery and you try to get it right, if that works and you get that feedback every day of the week, everyone's on a cloud.
Yeah.
And again, because we also sit in a place where people do die, so it's an interesting balance, but certainly that would be the most energizing thing I can think of amongst the team.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my guests, Amit Shah. He's at Verta Health, where they're looking at diabetes. Now they're for-profit, non-for-profit. But one of the things that they tend to do is they have a Monday morning call. We'll have a success story patient dial in and tell how their journey has changed by working with the company and what are the things they found. It doesn't have to be always positive. They also give feedback, but it's really a patient dialing in and it's all hands on deck. I think almost everyone at the company, and they've scaled rapidly, they tend to listen in. And to your point, it's very energizing when you're hearing from a patient who received the care and really helping. But even to the outsider, those little things may not matter, but to the patient, it matters a lot, and to their families. And so that's interesting thing what you're saying is that in a mission-driven organization, how powerful that is. But it's almost like, even I wonder why many of in the B2B services space wouldn't do it anyway, whether it's for-profit or not for profit. But often I know that it's hard to get the client on the phone, but also there's a little bit of man, I wonder what they're going to say.
Yeah. It comes with risk. You get the whole gamut too, right? Sometimes you'll get the opposite of a compliment, but I think that's powerful too. I mean, we very proactively survey customer satisfaction throughout our patients and cohort, and we're very open and transparent if we can improve things. And it's even little things. I mean, every organisation has a different thing, but a lot of the people that come to our centre are with us probably for a couple of years. But we do things like we go to the pub with them. They'll do a fundraiser at a pub and we'll have 200 people and their families are all there, and our medicos and the researchers all go as well. And so I think as one of our professors said, in terms of human capital, hopefully people check their ego when they come to work for us, because, everyone's equal. We're all on a journey in life. Some of those people aren't with us for as long, but if we can help improve that, then if we've done that, that's not a bad outcome.
Yeah. No, that's a really nice way to think about it. At the end of the day, especially given the purpose of the organization, just to keep reminding yourself why you're there, especially as you say, in an environment where fundraising is tough, where, supply of talent is tough, where you've still got to provide a level of care that is comparable to what they might get in private, and so you want to maintain those standards of service, but while also having your team stay focused and energized. And that's, yes, there's the economic part of the nonprofit, but this is the qualitative aspect.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think, for most charities, their biggest issue is where do you stop? Because you want to help everybody, but, before you know it, you're putting a chain around the door and you're not not living and sustainable. So yeah, it's confronting that, but it's at some point, yeah, you do have to probably draw a line and say we can only do X as far as we can go.
Yep. Mark, as we sort of get towards the end of this call, maybe 3-part question. First is, if you were to give advice to non-profits that are out in the market trying to scale up, what would be the one do and one don't that you would leave? Say, hey, absolutely try this or do this that work for us, and don't. And then there's 2 other categories of people that love to get your advice for. Well, maybe we'll start with the charity first, and then we'll go into the other categories.
So the first one for me, I'd say to somebody is don't die wondering.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't mean that literally in the sense of just throw all risk out the door and just go and do some blue sky thing. But, I think as a charity, that is part of, you're not going to change sometimes the status quo is important to keep, and that's appropriate. But at other times, most charities are trying to move the needle. So that's going to take some bold projects. They're things you may not be able to do, but if you start that journey, you'd be surprised sometimes where it'll take you, and sometimes it won't work, but that's okay. You learn along the way as well. So I think be bold, and I don't say that lightly because it's a simple literal statement, but if people are true to it, you'll ride the bumps, and it'll definitely be tough, but hopefully you come out the other end with a better outcome.
That's really good advice. By the way, that applies to not just charities, right? That applies to anyone wanting to. That applies to. It's not just, yes, this podcast is focused for business leaders and businesses and investors, but it's really anyone listening. Just being bold, having a crack at something, even when you're sort of trying, and that could be as simple as something in your personal life, right? Like you've been thinking about it. To sort of go after it. I think that's just wise wisdom. And so the second question for you is, when you think about people who are bringing on talent, and so I'm thinking CEOs, I'm thinking investors, I'm thinking even hiring managers, when they're thinking about bringing people in from within their industry versus outside their industry, what again, one do and one don't that you would say to them as they're building up their teams, especially in a talent scarce environment?
I think when you bring them in, it's a sort of well-known mantra, but we have a pretty simple philosophy. If you get the right person, obviously you got to support them, give them the right tools and resources where you can, and then for God's sake, get out of their way. So don't do everything you can to support them, mentor them, connect them up, be part of the team, but don't get in their way because, that's why you want them there. So I think that's really important, and that's always a challenge in charities because sometimes you can't give them all the resources you'd love to give them, but I think you can complement that in other ways. So I think that's probably important when you bring them in. And then I think the other one is, and it's a failing of me, is you got to be careful. I've seen many other people in charities do this. It is hard because you don't have enough people, so everyone gets stretched horizontally. So, one day you might literally be cleaning the toilets and the next day you're shaking the hands of the Prime Minister. So, you've got to be conscious of how to have that going on in your own mind because you'll get diluted and a lot of things going to get done. So if you're bringing new people in, try to be really clear on what you want out of them, working with them and making sure they don't get distracted and spread too thinly either.
I really like that. I think my version of what you were saying before was that if you want to get rid of talented people, just tell them what to do all the time. They'll go away anyway. They'll leave you.
Correct.
Yes,
that's right.
I think this is your counsel to get out of their way because if they are talented, let them do their job, let them bring to the table what they're best capable of. And as you said, supporting them is going to be the biggest ROI for them and you, right?
Yeah.
And so,
absolutely.
Love it. Yeah. And then final question is for those who are looking to raise capital, for profit or not, individuals or funds or companies, given the environment, given the market where it is, what is the one thing you'd say absolutely do this? And again, one that try not to do that.
A starting point would be there's money out there and you've just got to find it, right? So I'd say to people, don't be discouraged by the doom and gloom that's going on. I think the basics, be true to yourself, be true to what your mission and purpose is, and then therefore that should direct you to where those funding sources are most likely to be. Doesn't mean you know exactly where they are, but if you know that, and again, you can qualify pretty quickly whether you're trying to match up to somebody that has zero interest in that segment or doesn't play with you. So I think, being conscious of that and then spending probably more time than less time on getting that either information, contacts, understanding of where you should be focusing. And we're not in this situation, but if people had some money, I think you could spend a bit of money up front on that. Then you're directed, you're having good conversations off the bat when you're meeting people, and they're sort of roughly in your wheelhouse in terms of whether they're a funding opportunity or not.
So what you're saying is that do your diligence up front, get the plan right, make sure that you're hyper-focused on who and why you're going after, and stick to your values. Because whether it's for profit or not, capital raise is a funny business, and I'll just leave it at that for now. And it's like one of those where it does challenge the best of us, and so that's really wise counsel, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. So thank you for the opportunity.
Talk soon. Cheers. Bye.
Talk soon. Cheers. Bye.
Looking for more ideas on how to accelerate your business growth, hire amazing people, and improve your leadership potential? Check out our full-length episodes on the People Quotient podcast. Subscribe now.